The restaurant was called Villa Capri, and it sat on the corner of McCadden Place in Hollywood like a jewel box someone had forgotten to close. Inside, the walls were dark wood and red velvet, the kind of place where the lights stayed low and the wine bottles never had prices on the menu. It was 1953, and if you wanted to be seen in Los Angeles, this was where you came. Producers, directors, actors whose faces sold magazines, and the men who owned the city from the shadows. Table 12 was in the back corner, away from the windows, tucked beside a curved booth that could seat 6, but tonight held only 2. Ava Gardner sat with her back to the wall, a cigarette burning between her fingers, wearing a black dress that made every woman in the room feel like they'd dressed wrong. She wasn't trying to be beautiful. She just was. The kind of beautiful that made men forget their own names, and women hate themselves for noticing. Across from her sat Frank Sinatra. Thin, sharp-shouldered, his tie loose at the collar, his sleeves rolled to the elbows like a man who'd been working all day and didn't care who knew it. They weren't married yet. That would come later. But everyone in the room knew they were together. You could see it in the way he leaned toward her when she spoke, in the way she smiled at him, like he was the only person in the world who'd ever understood the joke. They were halfway through dinner when the man walked in. His name was Mickey Cohen, and he didn't need to introduce himself. Everyone knew who he was. Short, stocky, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a year, with rings on 3 fingers and a watch that caught the light every time he moved his hand. He owned nightclubs and numbers rackets and half the politicians in the city. He walked like a man who'd never been told no in his life, and wouldn't know what to do with it if he had been. He came with 4 men. They moved through the restaurant like sharks through shallow water, cutting between tables, eyes scanning the room for threats that didn't exist. Cohen stopped at table 7, a producer Sinatra knew, a man who owed money to people Cohen worked with, and said something that made the producer's face go white. Then he laughed, loud, the kind of laugh that wasn't about humor. It was about power, about making sure everyone in the room knew who owned the air they were breathing. Sinatra glanced up but didn't hold the look. He went back to his wine. Ava didn't look up at all. She just exhaled smoke toward the ceiling and said something that made Sinatra smile. They were in their own world, a small island in the middle of the noise, and for a moment, it seemed like that's where they'd stay. But Cohen noticed her. He always noticed beautiful women. It was a reflex, a need. He stopped mid-sentence, mid-laugh, and turned his head toward table 12. His eyes locked on Ava, and something shifted in his face. Not desire, not exactly, something uglier, something that looked like entitlement, like he'd just seen something he wanted and couldn't imagine a reason he shouldn't have it. He started walking toward them. His men followed, spreading out slightly, creating a wall of bodies that blocked the nearest exit. The restaurant went quiet, not silent. Conversations still murmured in the corners. Silverware still clinked against plates, but quiet enough that people noticed. Quiet enough that the waiters stopped moving. Quiet enough that Sinatra's hand, halfway to his glass, paused in midair. Cohen stopped at table 12. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait to be invited. He just planted himself at the edge of the table, one hand resting on the back of Ava's chair, and smiled down at her like a cat that had cornered a bird. "Ava Gardner," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a tin can. Even more beautiful in person. They don't do you justice in the pictures. Ava looked up slowly. Her expression didn't change. No smile, no fear, just a cool, distant look, like she was studying something mildly unpleasant that had appeared on her plate. "Thank you," she said, flat, final. The kind of tone that should have ended the conversation. But Cohen didn't move. He leaned in closer, his hands sliding from the chair to the table, fingers drumming against the wood. "You know, a woman like you shouldn't be wasting her time with a crooner. You should be with a man who can take care of you. Real care. The kind that comes with weight." Sinatra's jaw tightened. His hand closed around the stem of his wine glass, knuckles going white. But he didn't speak. Not yet. He just watched. Waiting. His eyes were cold and still, like water before it freezes. Ava stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray, slow and deliberate, and looked Cohen in the eye. "I'm fine where I am." Cohen smiled wider. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who'd heard the word no before and treated it like a suggestion. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that. I'm just trying to be friendly. Maybe buy you a drink. Maybe take you somewhere that isn't." He glanced at Sinatra, dismissive, like he was noticing a stain on the tablecloth. So crowded. That's when Sinatra stood up. He didn't do it fast. He didn't slam his chair back or raise his voice. He just stood, slowly, carefully, like a man picking up something fragile that might break if he wasn't gentle. The room noticed. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-word. Even Cohen's men shifted their weight, hands moving toward their coats, uncertain whether this was the moment things went bad. Sinatra was 6 inches shorter than Cohen, 20 pounds lighter. His suit didn't cost a fraction of what Cohen's did, and his hands didn't have rings. But when he looked at Cohen, when he met his eyes and held them, the size difference didn't matter, because Sinatra had something Cohen didn't. Something that couldn't be bought or stolen or beaten out of someone. He had dignity. He didn't step closer. He didn't invade Cohen's space. He just stood there, still and quiet, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. The kind of voice you'd use to calm a frightened dog. "She said she's fine." Cohen's smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes changed. A flicker, a crack. Like he'd just realized the ground under his feet wasn't as solid as he'd thought. "You talking to me, singer? I'm talking to you," Sinatra said. Still soft, still calm. "And I'm asking you, politely, to step away from the table." Cohen laughed, but it sounded hollow now, forced. He glanced at his men, like he needed them to confirm what he already knew, that this was ridiculous, that Sinatra was nobody, that he could crush him like a bug if he wanted to. And his men nodded, grinned, played along. But none of them moved. None of them touched Sinatra, because they'd heard the stories. They knew. Cohen leaned in closer to Sinatra, dropping his voice to a growl. "You know who I am?" "I know who you are," Sinatra said. "Then you know what I can do. I know what you think you can do." The air in the restaurant turned thick, heavy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Every eye in the room was on them now. The producers, the actors, the waiters frozen against the walls. 200 people holding their breath, waiting to see if this was the night Frank Sinatra died in a Hollywood restaurant over a woman who wasn't even his wife yet. Cohen straightened up. His hand left the table. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder, harder. "You got a death wish, Frankie?" Sinatra didn't blink. "I've got a table. And you're standing too close to it." For a long moment, no one moved. Cohen's men waited for the signal. Sinatra stood his ground, hands at his sides, body relaxed, but ready. And Ava just sat there, watching, her face unreadable, a fresh cigarette already between her lips. Then Cohen did something no one expected. He laughed again. But this time it was different, quieter, almost genuine. Like he'd just realized he was watching something he hadn't seen in a long time. A man who wasn't afraid of him. A man who wasn't pretending. A man who'd looked him in the eye and refused to look away. Cohen stepped back. Just one step. But it was enough. "You got balls, Singer, I'll give you that." Sinatra didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting until Cohen turned and walked away. His men followed, glancing back over their shoulders, confused, angry, unsure what had just happened or why they were leaving. And as Cohen reached the door, he paused, looked back one more time at Sinatra, and nodded. Once. Not respect. Not exactly. But acknowledgement. The kind of nod you give someone when you realize they're not what you thought they were. Then, he was gone. The door closed, and the restaurant exhaled. The noise came back slowly. A cough, a glass clinking. Someone laughing too loud, trying to fill the silence. Conversations restarted, hesitant at first, then louder. Everyone talking about what they'd just seen, trying to make sense of it, trying to decide if it had really happened or if they'd imagined it. Sinatra sat back down. He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and set it down again like nothing had happened. His hand was steady, not shaking, not clenched, just steady. Ava reached across the table and put her hand on his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. Gratitude, pride, something deeper that didn't have a name. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Sinatra shrugged. "Yeah, I did." She smiled. A real smile this time. Soft. Private. The kind of smile she only gave to him. "You're crazy, you know that?" "So are you," he said. "That's why we work." They finished their dinner. The restaurant went back to normal. The waiters brought dessert. The pianist in the corner started playing again, something slow and easy that filled the spaces between conversations. But everyone in that room knew what they'd seen. They knew that Frank Sinatra, a man who made his living singing love songs, a man with a voice like velvet and a body that looked like it would break in a strong wind, had stood up to one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles and hadn't flinched. Not because he wanted to fight, not because he thought he could win, but because someone he cared about had been disrespected, and that was something he couldn't allow. Not from Mickey Cohen, not from anyone. The story spread. By the next morning, everyone in Hollywood knew about it. The producers, the studio heads, the other mobsters who ran the city from back rooms and dark cars. They all heard what had happened at Villa Capri. How Sinatra had faced down Cohen. How Cohen had walked away. How 200 people had watched in silence, waiting for blood, and instead witnessed something stranger, something quieter. They witnessed restraint. On both sides. Cohen could have killed Sinatra. His men were armed, the restaurant was crowded, but that had never stopped him before. And Sinatra could have swung. Could have started something that would have ended with both of them dead on the floor, but neither of them did. Because in that moment, both men understood something that no one else in the room could see. That violence was easy. That anger was cheap. That any fool with a gun could settle a score. But walking away, standing your ground without throwing a punch, making your point without spilling blood, that took something harder. That took control. And control, in a world built on chaos, was the rarest currency of all. Mickey Cohen never bothered Ava Gardner again. He never sent flowers, never called, never showed up uninvited at another table. And when people asked him about that night, and they did ask, he just shrugged and said, "Sinatra's all right. He's got spine." Which, coming from Mickey Cohen, was as close to an apology as anyone was ever going to get. Sinatra and Ava got married the following year. It didn't last. Nothing that burned that bright ever did. But that night at table 12 stayed with both of them. A moment when the world had tried to take something from them, and they'd said no, together, without hesitation, without fear. Years later, long after the marriage had ended, long after Ava had moved to Spain and Sinatra had become the biggest star in the world, someone asked him about that night. About Cohen. About what he'd been thinking when he stood up. Sinatra lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and smiled. Not the public smile. Not the one he used on stage. The private one. The one that belonged to moments like that. "I was thinking," he said, "that if I didn't stand up, I'd have to live with sitting down, and I didn't like how that felt." That was all. No grand speech, no moral, just a simple truth. That some things are worth standing for. That some people are worth protecting. And that sometimes, the bravest thing a man can do is rise from his chair and refuse to move. The restaurant is gone now. Villa Capri closed decades ago, replaced by something newer, shinier, forgettable. But the people who were there that night never forgot. They carried the story with them. Told it to their children, their grandchildren. And the story changed shape over the years, the way all stories do, growing larger, stranger, more dramatic with each retelling. But the core remained the same. A mobster disrespected a woman. A singer stood up, and 200 people went silent, waiting to see if love was stronger than fear. It was. Just barely. Just enough. And in the quiet that followed, in the space between the threat and the violence that never came, something was proven that nobody could argue with. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands. Still, steady, unafraid. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.